question. So, yeah, I was just going to ask about, because I know that you work with lots of different projects, and we've spoken a little bit about that through the interview, but I just wanted to ask, what are the unique set of skills that you have or that you've developed that enable you to work in the diverse way that you do, you know, in all these different areas?
I get, I don't want it to sound facetious because I think there's a genuine thing to it, but you know, confidence, I guess, which is ultimately a form of fucking white male privilege. The fact that I feel like I can do these things and just take a chance on it. I know I'm not the best writer, and I know I'm not the best designer, and I know I'm not the best film critic, or have necessarily the best taste in these things, but I'm willing to have a run at it. And I'm willing to take the chance. So I don't think it is about being the best at these things or develop or making sure that you can write or making sure that you can interview or making sure that you can successfully articulate things. I think it's just a conviction. And I think it's a kind of like, I believe in these things. I love the films and I love film itself. That's a gift and a curse in that it makes it easy to find the passion for these things and get excited. But it also really hurts when these things don't necessarily happen the way you want, or the person that you thought would be really into it isn't, or, you know, rejects it or whatever. Like those things are inevitable, but they still sting, you know. But I feel like, in a way, even though the topics change, even though the kind of points of view of the books change, I'm kind of making the same book over and over and over again, because ultimately it's a manifestation of what I value as creativity and what I value as my kind of way of my belief structures around what creativity is. And I don't see it as a boxed off thing. I think writing is creative. I think interviewing is creative. I think, you know, thinking, I think it's an intellectual discipline. I think it happens in the head. And I think there's these moments of, you know, they're almost like ad breaks, really, where you might make something visual. But before that, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of chatting, there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of challenging, there's a lot of, you know, things influencing stuff and ideas. It's all really intellectual and happens in the head, and I feel that translates to it's irrespective of the outcome. It's irrespective of whether the outcome's a book or a film or a piece of music or a piece of writing or a logo or a diagram or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. That's the thing I value, is creativity. So all of these things, I don't feel like it's something I need to learn or get bogged down with thinking, oh, I've never done that before, I don't have the experience. I trust the fact that I feel like it's still creativity, and I think that what I'm actually aiming for is an expression of that creativity. And to get there, I need to interview someone that might never done that before. I need to get over those hurdles. I need to have confidence that in working on this thing, I will get there. And that kind of goes with every approach. But there's also the kind of the humility and the fact that if I can't do it, I have to find someone who can. And in a way, that just echoes the kind of the process of filmmaking. Really, it's a team thing, and if there's someone I feel can render an idea better, then it's about bringing them in on the collaboration. It's not about a director or a dictator point of view. I feel like everyone's point of view is interesting, if not probably more interesting than my own. I get fed up with my own ideas a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love working with that collaborators on this, like bringing in people like Cozy Fanny Tutti or John Grant or Gavin Turk or whomever, you know, Shepard Fairey, and just saying, what do you think? What did this film mean to you? Or what did you like about it? And that's inspiring as fuck, you know, when they start talking about things that you haven't clocked, or they send you down avenues of things, or they articulate what's been in your head or in a different way. That's such a thrill, it's such a rewarding process. I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to be able to just chat about something I love, to make something I really want to make with these amazing people that I admire. So
that seems to be an important aspect of the work that you do, is collaboration. It's this importance of working with other people, because, you know, working in, you know, graphic design traditionally could be, yes, a client you know, and a designer working, there's a relationship there. But it seems that a lot of the work that you do, which I don't know how you consider it, whether it's personal projects or it's like hybrid, you know, some of these types of projects that you work, but they seem to rely a lot on the idea of collaborative practice.
No, they're all the one and the same. I mean, you know, the intention or the kind of the springboard to start these things might not come from a client, or, you know, the origin of these things might come from different places. It might be myself, my own head, my own ideas, my own ambitions. It might be a chat with one of the designers I work with. It might be a client. I don't care, but like, ultimately they're all the same. They're all creative executions of something. They just have different frameworks that they work within. And the kind of, I don't know. Like, I think collaboration as sometimes is a dirty word, or, you know, like students, for example. I'm sure you'll. Well, I'm guessing you might empathize with this. Like, they see it as like forced fun half the time. They think, oh, fucking hell, I've got to engage with someone else, and I've got to argue with me. I've got to argue my idea to the top, kind of thing. And I don't see it like that at all. I see it as long as we're all agreed in the kind of the we share the vision for something, or like, it might not even be like that. And I don't mean the vision as in a visual thing. I mean like the idea as a concept or a notion or something it's trying to do. If we share a common ground on it, the collaboration is just about making it better. And it's as much about trusting your own vision and your own skills and having conviction in your own ideas as it is as being prepared to be wrong, and that being okay.
Yeah.
And I'm in love with that. I'm in love with the idea that someone else has got a different point of view from me, because I think, or comes from a different background from me, or has different experiences than me, because I just think that makes it better. And the creative industries, film, design, you know, whatever we want, art, whatever we want to call, I think all of those disciplines all suffer from that kind of, they suffer from a paradox of talking about creativity as this romantic, feral thing that we can't control. And the only way we can control it is to feed it different sources of stuff, have a diverse income of material, go to theaters, go to watch films, read books, look at shit. You know, we do that, but then how we manifest it is the complete antithesis of that.
And I think that's one of the things that I find as a challenge, because one of my favorite designers is Tibor Kalman, and he spoke very much.
Love Tibor.
Yeah, and that philosophy that you talk about is something that people like him were very much. It was about relationships that he had with people, whatever the project might be. It's like the project materialized, like you said, through discussions. Yeah. And it's just about finding a partner, whether that partner is a client, whether that partner is a writer, whether that partner is a, you know, photographer or a filmmaker. The project obviously needs funding, and that's the rub a lot of times, isn't it? It's about finding people that you can do the project with that can facilitate that project happening. So with Rough Trade Books, it's obviously the publisher, but it's a publisher with a similar maybe mindset that enables that relationship to happen. Yeah. So I guess that's ultimately the thing, isn't it? Is that not everyone is in the situation to turn ideas or projects they might have in their head into something that's got the funding behind it. But I guess it's the intention, isn't it, very early on to say, look, I just need to find people that maybe can make these visions happen.
Yeah, let's try, you know, let's try. And I think, you know, it's, yeah, ultimately it can feel like it's just me behind it all, you know. I'm sure it appears that way, but it doesn't feel like that when I'm doing it. And that's certainly not, in my mind, the reality of it, because everybody wades in on these things, and even people in opposition to it help it. You know, I think that they make it better, and I love that, because I think it's great. People see things that I don't, and you don't want to be. I just don't like that stubborn view of creation. I don't buy into that idea of individual genius, and I don't, and this, you know, this virginal inspiration and kind of origination of an idea being, and you know, that kind of immaculate conception thing that only one person can have an idea and it's going to be something new that no one else has ever seen. I don't think those things work. And I use alien invasion movies as an example to articulate myself. It's like when the aliens land, this new thing that doesn't look, has no frame of reference at all within our world, lands. when you talk about creativity, that's the thing you're looking for. When you articulate it, when you fucking manifest it, and it doesn't look like anything else, you kill the fucking thing. You know, that's what happens. Watch any and fuck it, they're bad because they don't look like us. Kill the fucking things. And that's what happens with ideas. If they don't have a footing in another idea or another technology or something that's come on that we are familiar with, they fail.
Mm.
And you know, you look at Apple and people that we claim are these, you know, revolutionary things. It's like, no, they're not. They built their ideas from other things. They've evolved. They're not revolutions, they're evolutions of stuff. Like in the iPod, there were fucking loads of MP3 players around. The iPod just took what they all did well and assembled them in one place. It just got, you know, the iPhone. You know, people think that the iPhone and the iPad were these fucking magic leaps in society. I remember that the fucking iPod had touchscreen before the phone came out, and that was them testing the technology, getting people used to that idea of, you know, not having buttons. And all the kind of skeuomorphism stuff was part of that journey of getting people used to the idea that these fucking hard buttons that you used to pressing are going to disappear because you're just going to be tapping glass. Is all part of that. So there isn't this, like I said, this immaculate conception, and that doesn't, and you can't get anywhere near those places on your own. So I surrender to that. I embrace it. I think it's great.
Well, the film is a great example of that, because although it might have John Carpenter, like Would They Live, a John Carpenter film, the idea is that you see at the end, you know, the involvement of so many people within the story. And you're talking about screenwriters and, you know, people that are, you know, visualizers and, you know, production managers, and you've got everyone that contributes to the whole thing. And sometimes it does get lost in the process. But I think what you say is, I think a really relevant thing for anyone going into a creative practice is that importance. And I know that there's always been the idea of the celebrated designer, or, you know, this kind of pyramidal structure that you've got someone at the top.
Yeah.
But like you said, if that person is too much, becomes the, you know, the focal point, then I think the notion of a collaborative practice in terms of where ideas have to emerge from is they don't come fully formed. You know, the film Inception suggests the idea that there's this moment, there's this point where any idea comes from, but for that to go from that point all the way to the finished outcome requires all of this engagement from loads of different places.
Absolutely. You know, I kind of I practice around that, because I genuinely and fundamentally believe that experience doesn't make you have better ideas. You know, me, you know, that has been working on this company for 10 years or whatever, I don't have better ideas than, you know, someone who's just walked through the door 10 minutes ago. I have the experience to better manage those ideas into fruition, but that's not creativity, really. That's fucking project managing. You know, it's like, so why build this framework around a fallacy that you have better ideas than other people? I just see that as arrogance. So yeah, and I think it's one of the, like, to give him a bit of credit, and I'm not used to this, but like Kubrick, like, people see Kubrick as this, as probably the archetypal auteur of a singular vision and a singularity of which his films, like, they will cite, he has made the archetype of each kind of genre film going, and then they cast backwards from that point to look at how he made those films with that lens and say that all of this stuff is that originality. But I don't see it that way at all. Like, in researching The Shining and watching all these documentaries of people, there's a great one about it's not a bit boring anymore, is it? I forgot what the name of the studio is now, but where they filmed it all. There's a great documentary where they're talking to fucking chippies and you know, just people that were just prop people or set decorators or locations, or even just the tech guys and the runners and all that. They just talk to people that work there all the time, and they're articulating these stories where they'd be fascinated in what they do for a living, and can you make my camera go on these rails and stuff like that. That's not Kubrick demanding his vision because he knows he knows the outcome and he wants to get to the outcome, and he's just like saying, I want you to do this because this is my vision. I think he's working it out right then and there, and there's evidence, like Lee Unkrich, you know, who's done that other Shining book, and you know, his filmmaking. He found that kind of humanity in him as well. And when I spoke with Lee about stuff, like, it really chimed with me that he didn't have things worked out, and he used people. And no, he didn't use people. He used their skills because he knew that they were better than him at certain things, and he used that to make the vision a better reality. So I see that in the practice that went about, not in all of it, and I don't agree with some of his methods, but ultimately I don't see it as this, you know, he wasn't the yardstick, wasn't the measure of which was a good idea and a bad idea. He was just sort of pulling all these strings together. And it's like, you know, the kind of other men's flowers analogy, you know, that you assemble other men's flowers and all you are is the string that binds them all together in the bouquet. I think that's kind of how he worked, really. He would assemble things.
It's a good example of that. I mean, but he's also, you know, I think a lot has been discussed about the idea that, you know, as a director, as someone that has a vision, a lot of times you do have a general idea of what you want to create. And, you know, even, for example, all the stuff, the research, because he's a massive researcher. And I think that's one of the things that you see that when you think about skill sets is that, you know, you were talking about confidence is really important to make some of the projects that you've got, you know, the bolshiness to do it. But there's the hard work that comes into it. There's the research, there's the diligence, there's the discipline that needs to necessitate the idea of, I've got a vision. Yeah, you can give it to loads of people, but unless in a sense there's some idea of what it is that you want to create, and you've gone far enough to want to make that happen. I guess the tension happens between what it is that you've got fixed and where the space is for other people to come into that process.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, what you find is if you really surrender to these kind of processes is you're not necessarily, if you're the person like responsible for driving it like the director would be, or Kubrick certainly would be, you're not necessarily those things that people think about when they think of Kubrick, and they think of the shots and how beautiful the thing, and they think of the technicality and, you know, the technology that was used and all of those kinds of things, the classic Kubrick contents page, you know. I think actually the thing he was best at was making decisions, really. You know, he'd make the decision. Ultimately, the decision lies with him, and he would make the right decision for what he wanted to do. And that aligns, like you're saying, with the vision. That would be what he would cast all these other things about. But ultimately, I think it still stands that he wants that all that stuff feeds into something that other people can draw off and can make, they can bring their specialism to it, and they can make that bigger whole better by their part. And I think he was very good at doing that. And he also had the means to do that. Let's not fucking beat around the bush with Kubrick. He had a fucking massive studio that would just give him a blank check to do this. Whereas people, which is why I respect horror a lot more than a lot of other genres, is they don't get that.
Yeah.
They have to work a lot more creatively and creatively in a way that I recognize and kind of appreciate more. That's another thing to raise, but you know,
creative freedom. Being in a position where you've got that to be able to call the shots to a certain degree. I guess if you're ever working with a studio from a filmmaker's perspective, there's always going to be some slight tension, but you see, you know, the filmmakers that get to the stage to have that influence over the vision that they've got is few and far between. It takes a very long period of time, and I guess there's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made. And, you know, John Carpenter is an interesting example in terms of the films that he made, that they always seem to have some sort of return, and the budgets that he might work were restricted to a certain degree. But I think he did become a director that had certain control over certain visual ideas.
Yeah. And I think Carpenter, for me, I know it's massively tinted by my kind of love and adoration for his work. And in some regards, him as a person, I really love how, you know, fuck the world he is sometimes.
Yeah.
I feel, you know, there are a lot of, I think it's fair to call him an auteur. You know, I think it's fair that all of those things that we talk about when we talk about John Carpenter are absolutely valid, because I think in the things that you say about Kubrick, you can say about him. You know, Kubrick's films, by and large, you know, they operated the same as John Carpenter's. They generally weren't that fucking well received when they first came out, and it's only later that they found an audience and built this kind of reputation around them. Pretty much every single one of Kubrick's films was like that. They were both around the corner when we were still coming up the street.
Yeah.
What Carpenter did with the Panaglide in Halloween was effectively the same as what Kubrick did in The Shining with the Steadicam, 10 or more, well, not even 10 years, is it? But, a few years later. So, the technological aspect there is there, and the kind of that knowing, I just think Carpenter had to think on his feet a little bit better than Kubrick had to, because Kubrick would do everything to organize the structure so he had time to shoot. That's why he was a massive researcher. So he bought his time on the set, whereas Carpenter didn't have that luxury. It was like, right, fuck, here we go. So I really like. I think that's why I appreciate Carpenter in the way I do, in that I see a lot of these things happening, and I've got no idea why I'm talking about this now, but
But you've got Burton that you're working. I mean, when is the new film? Well, I guess when is the new book coming out? The one with
these things don't. Again, me kind of surrendering to this process. We don't really force the next book. Like, They Live wasn't the first one because it was my favorite. It was the first one because it materialized quicker than the others. We were approaching people on The Shining, on Beetlejuice, on Donnie Darko, on They Live, all at the same time. It just happened that They Live really came together quicker than the others, and it was like, right, we've got enough to park the others now and pursue this. And then after that, and the success of that, the only kind of conscious, it wasn't even decision, but a choice that we sort of discussed was like, we've done a cult one that's definitely got its own audience and has got us in a really interesting place with people. What if we did something a bit bigger than that now? And we started The Shining, and that was on and off for years, really, mainly because we were scared of what the family might think of it. And they love litigating, so there was that in our minds, and we were on and off with that. And I met with Richard Kelly in LA when I was over there with my wife, and we talked about Donnie Darko, and that sort of halted because he's got some plans in the pipeline with that film. And then they're constantly ongoing. And I think at the minute, the reason why I've sort of said Beetlejuice is I know that the new one's coming out next year. And it's a case of like, well, should we sort of chime with that? Should we mirror it just to be commercially sensible, really? But it's no closer than others that we've been working on, like like Donnie Darko, or others that are on my radar. Some of them are really like, there's ones that get you into, I was going to say interesting conversations, but they're not interesting conversations. They're kind of moral feelings about stuff, like Roman Polanski and Rosemary's Baby, which ignorantly I put on my list thinking that'd be great to do. It was only when I became fully aware of the kind of the rape case and things like that I can't, put my own personal convictions, I just can't go near it. As much as I think the film is great, and I enjoy the film and I enjoy his films, it's not there. Even though it's still there.
I mean, from a publishing perspective, the idea of working on lots of different projects at the same time, it's something that a lot of people might not know about. Is this idea that if you've got a concept, working, to be able to kind of filter and take opportunities to draw that content in, because if you're meeting or you're going out to to LA or whatever, and then you've got the opportunity to meet, it might not come around, so this idea of being able to grab all the stuff together. I mean, personally, I think it's I love the series, and obviously I would want to see more and more, because I mean, I haven't read The Shine, I haven't got that one yet. I mean, I'm worked through it, but I think They Live is one of my favorite.
I'm not say books at the minute, mate. Get yourself.
Sorry, I know I need to get on the case. But They Live personally is a film that interests me, and like you said, the entry point to some of these things might be just the idea of the films that appeal to you for specific reasons. And They Live does. I mean, Shining, I absolutely adore. Donnie Darko, Beetlejuice. I mean, I think they're very evocative films. I mean, Shining, I guess has got this iconic. They're all iconic in their own ways.
Yeah.
And I think they do, like you said, they can draw us in from lots of different perspectives. So I'm, obviously just really looking forward to the next titles.
I mean, the only kind of foresight and editorship or stewardship, for a different word, like I have over these things, is making sure that we balance it out, because I don't want it to just be all cult films, and I don't want it to just be all mainstream films.
Yeah,
because that, even though I have that criteria of what the books should operate within the films, of the epiphany thing and all of that, they're still in the very, what you would say, I guess, mainstream movies, and they appear in very cult, obscure is not the right word, but to certain swathes of audiences, they are kind of obscure films. And I want to make sure that we have that breadth, because there's one in Jerry Maguire, for example, like his manifesto, his book completely changes the entire film from the off. I'm interested in what that says about our kind of commercial relationships and stuff like that. But there's one in Mandy, which I fucking really want to do. So it's like making sure we've got that balance. And, They Live, to The Shining, feels good. To Beetlejuice, it feels like a right kind of interesting, because it's Beetlejuice, and it's interesting. It's one of those films that so many people are aware of, but not everybody's seen. It's for a certain generation of people. A lot of people have seen Beetlejuice, but there's a lot of people that haven't seen it as well, particularly new generations. Plus, it's really early on in Burton's career, and it's almost, I mean, his second kind of full feature in a studio feature anyway, but it is the one film that does, that is the kind of explosion of the Tim Burton style, as it were. You don't see it really in Pee-wee, but you do definitely see it in Beetlejuice. And
I guess the thing is
Batman, but there's still elements of that there, traces, but it's just not as in your face as Beetlejuice, and he ultimately always returns to that place.
But I guess that's the thing, is that there's the commercial necessity sometimes with some of these projects, like you said, is that if you've got carte blanche, because I know your role at Rough Trades is that there's like a partnership role in terms of being able to have, so rather than a writer that comes to a publisher and says, I've got this idea, and you've really got to sell it, I guess it gives you a little bit more freedom to be able to say, okay, if you can control the money side of things, and I guess from a graphic design standpoint and being print buyer and having an understanding of how the whole process works, does that enable you to be able to do these types of projects, which can sometimes feel, like they're dream projects, but they're not necessarily conventional ones that would fit in other publishers' library?
I'm fortunate, really, that Rough Trade, I mean, the relationship with Rough Trade, it's been life-changing, really. But I'm fortunate that I align with what they want to do, but also I'm now like intrinsic to how they do it. And be up for this series, it wasn't, we absolutely treated it with respect. It's not that, it's not a privilege. I mean, it is a privilege, obviously, but it's not a kind. It's not a Craig works there, so wherever Craig says goes scenario at all. It's treated like every other title in respect to how it needs to perform with money, where we get produced, what standards it sort of matches up to, the content of it, the political nature of these things, all of that. Again, going back to the collaborative nature, is not just my decision, it's everybody's decision. And we talk about these things a lot, and we talk about films, and should we do Beetlejuice, or should we do this one, or should we will do Beetlejuice, but should we do it next? It's all part of that. And I think the thing that appeals with the Rough Trade thing is that it is still for them on the periphery of what they do. They're known for music, not film. But where it aligns with them is the things we unpick from these films. The fact that we're talking about them as artifacts for communities and cultures, and not commodities. That we can wade in on politics. That the They Live book would never have been touched by any other mainstream publisher. They love it now because it's released and they can see how it will perform, but they would have never taken a shot on that. Not with how hard I go in on Reagan and Thatcher in there. And how we tear down, and also just the way it's assembled. Like, no, it has to be that size, and no, it has to be that finish, and then everything else will compromise. But they are the things that can't change. The Shining, for example, we had loads of chats about should it be in a box, should we just assemble it as it is, but then like just shrink wrap it so it comes as it is. And I was like, it kind of has to be in a box. What you see on screen is how it should be. And then, you know, it being loose leaf, for example, would never have fucking got through any publishing world. The fact that so many people have opened it up and it's gone fucking all down them like a pot of gravy, and they've just gone, oh fucking hell, it's all out of order now. It's been designed so it doesn't have to be in order, that you can read, and they're all individual things, and you can assemble them and reassemble them and edit them however you want. But that's designed in a way to reflect the film, because the film is about whatever you want it to be about, and it's made that way as well. So, but the fact that Rough Trade support these things and they get it is the privilege of it. And you know, so I have to
find the partnership again, isn't it?
Yeah,
but that's what we talk about, finding those partnerships that work so well.
And sometimes they trust me and say, okay, if it means that much to you, okay. And sometimes I have to concede that if it means that much to them, or if I don't understand something, or if they're telling me from their expertise that it's a certain way, then I have to go, okay, let's make it work with that in mind. Again, it's a push and pull thing.
Brilliant, Craig. I don't want to keep you for too long. I just had a couple of last questions more about just film.
Okay.
The first...
Not going to ask me favorite ones, are you?
What?
Not going to ask me favorite ones, eh? Because my fucking mind goes blank.
No. One of them is about the film that you relate to most. What's the film that you relate to most?
I don't know. I feel like this is kind of a favorite question, isn't it?
Well, relating to is not necessarily about favorite, because it's like if someone asks me my favorite, it's always about context. It's not, there isn't one favorite. There's like what movie I'm in, what it's, you know, because I've got favorite films that I've watched once. I don't repeat. And then I've got favorite films that I repeat over, and like The Big Lebowski, I can watch endlessly, right? But, you know, Fellini's 8.5, I watched once and it had such a major impact on me. I don't want to watch it again. So there's like different favorites, but I just think about relating. You know, when I think about something like They Live, for me as a graphic designer, as a creative, and my kind of way of looking at the world, something that They Live resonates with me, and I relate to it a lot on lots of different levels because of like who I am. But that can, you know, again, change depending on your age. I'm 50 now. At 20, very different film might have related.
Yeah, I mean that was, to be fair, like that was I was instantly thought what you've just said there. Like I think there were different films at different time periods in my life that chimed. Like I remember Donnie Darko. I remember when Donnie Darko came out, and I was, well, what was it, 2001? I was, you know, I was about to go to uni, and I remember that film having such a massive impact on me. But it wasn't necessarily just the film. Like I remember the world around the film, like the website. I remember being on the website for fucking hours. It was like the film. It was an extension of the film. That was probably the first time I'd experienced something that was of the world of the film, but wasn't the film itself. That extension of it, and it really resonated with me. That, and the fact that you couldn't, it wasn't just something you browsed. You know, you had to fucking work at it. Like the film, you had to put time in. Like you had to know the film to engage with it. You had to use passcodes. You had to click in the right place, and there wasn't one way through it either. And I remember the film like so vividly, like what the, you know, the initial like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck? I love it, but I don't understand it, and I want to understand it, but I don't know how to understand it. And I think at that point in time, for me, was riveting, really. And it wasn't that I identified with Donnie or anything like that. There wasn't a kind of an identification there. It just really put me in a different headspace completely. It shifted me completely.
Well, that's the perfect answer for that question, because it's like relating doesn't necessarily need to be the character. You know?
No, it's not like, oh, I see myself in that person.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that. It's almost like
thing. It was more about what it was doing, how it did it, and the fact that someone had done that, and it's out there in the world. And I got to that point to it where I always feel this way about, like, when, which is why I was on about the favorite thing. When people ask you, like, what films do you like, or they ask you what's your favorite album, or because the way that we relate to these things is such an internal process. Like music is a great example. You can't, because it's a different sense that you engage with it. You feel there's a level of exposure that has to happen for you to you almost have to go, I'm going to reveal something about myself by saying this. Ultimately, what happens in society is that you feel like you're going to be judged for it. And what does that say about me, and what are other people going to think about it? And it drops into all those kinds of wrongs, I think, in society, really, because it doesn't happen with everything. Like if somebody says to you, like somebody says, I like bananas. If somebody doesn't like bananas, they don't fucking leap on you. Why don't you like bananas? Like they do if you say, I really like The Cure, and someone's like, fucking Cure shit, whatever. Yeah. For some reason, they feel like there is a space to do that when it comes to art. So that's Donnie Darko for me. Like it eradicated that. I didn't care what people thought about me liking it, or it transcended it for me, and it was the first time that had ever happened. And I think it just completely reconfigured so much, and broke away so many things that were in my head about how you could be and how you could operate within a certain medium. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, I know there are obviously films that do that and are much more famous for doing that than Donnie Darko, and you could say that Last Year at Marienbad and things like that. That fuck with time and whatever. But for me, that was my one. That was my time, and that was my period. And that film, I mean, to this day, it still stays with me, and I still love watching it, even though it, is different. I watch it differently now to that I did. You never can watch any film the same twice.
No, I'm totally the same. And it was the last question I was going to ask is about a film that had an impact on me recently, which I didn't quite understand, and I still don't understand as of yet, is Ari Aster's Midsommar. I saw Beau is Afraid, and Beau is Afraid also had a very different sort of reaction, but I had a very visceral sort of reaction to Midsommar, and I still don't understand it. I know from a visual perspective, there's something about it, and it kind of deals with a lot of these things that are kind of pseudo-religious, and there's folklore aspects to it, and there's all these kind of aspects that are working on a subtle level. But that was the last film that had like a major impact on me. And can you think about the last film that had a real impact on you like that?
Yeah, Mandy. I remember watching that and it blowing my mind. And it was a complete. I'd actually got like a hooky copy of it. It was in cinemas, but a mate of mine sent me a link, and I was away on my own, and I just thought, fuck it, I'll take a punt on it. I'd not really read that much about it, and I just thought, I'm in the mood for a bit of Nick Cage doing Nick Cage, and that's what I thought it was going to be. And it hit me in a place where I didn't think it was going to at all, and I got really emotionally involved with it, considering how violent and how kind of fantastical it is. The kind of love that was in it really hit me, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. But another one that did that as well was Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here. Like I remember watching that, and I watched it. I didn't see it in theaters.
Joaquin Phoenix, right? Is that the one where he's the hit? Yeah.
And I remember getting that, streaming it when it had just come out, and it was available to stream. And I watched it about 5 times in a weekend. I just couldn't get it out of my mind.
Wow.
And it made me think, but it also entertained me and it engaged me, and I really wanted to get into it. So those two were the ones that spring to mind that really recently were,
amazing Johnny Greenwood score, wasn't it? Was that in that? Yeah. No,
I mean, Greenwood was one of those people. We tried to get Johnny in on The Shining because he's a big Penderecki fan.
Yes. Yeah.
It just doesn't do interviews basically. Spoke to his agent loads, and we were like, yeah, he's interested, and yeah, and it was one of those that just teetered off, and we just thought, let's just leave him be. He's obviously not going to do this.
Well, it's
But
great that you got John Grant involved in They Live.
yeah, yeah.
It's brilliant to
I
have
love
that.
John Grant. When Nina, who was my partner at Rough Trade, she's like really good friends with him.
Yeah.
And she knew that he collected horror scores, and she was
Right.
like, and I didn't know that about him as a fan.
Mhm.
She was like, "Oh, he loves all that. He just listens to them all the time, horror scores." And we're friends with Spencer, who runs Death Waltz Records, who releases all that, and John Grant used to buy all those from him. And it kind of started forming around it. And she was like, "Why don't you just speak to him?" And speaking to him was amazing. And it was just like, yeah, we should do something on this. And then it was just great to hear what he thought about it. It was
Well, it's what people sometimes talk about, like tribe. You know, it's like these people that you feel that connected to in some way because they've got curious minds. They're polymaths. They're not necessarily like in one particular area of interest. They kind of really absorb, go from lots of
and
different
the thing
areas.
is, it's like so, I think that's so vital to these books, in my point of view, because you could Google for fucking years and you would never find out that John Grant loves horror scores.
Yeah.
To have that, like you say, that kind of connection of mind to sort of know these things, to sort of, even like when you're thinking about these things, you've got to like have a lateral approach to it. You've got to sort of say, well, I feel that this person would be really interesting to speak to it, even though I've no idea if they've seen the film or like the film. I feel like I'd love to know what, given where they are in the world and what they seem to be about, what they might see in it if they did see it.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things with The Shining was we had Jen Colella, who's an author, and she's actually started as a translator, translating fiction from foreign languages into English. And she's written her own few books. Like, she's never seen The Shining, but she wrote about it.
All right.
That was fucking fascinating because she said that it was a point of view. She was like, "I'm not going to watch it. I'm just going to see what comes to mind based on all these vignettes that I have in my mind because I've seen it. I've never watched it." She was like, "Because it's fucking everywhere. You know the Jack Nicholson scene. You know the fucking red rum. You know the axe, you know all of this stuff about it, but you don't know how you know about it." And I just thought, do you know what? That is absolutely bang on what I want from you. I want to know what that feels like because because it's got so much cultural capital. You almost don't have to see it to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, I remember because it sort of brings to mind, I don't know, do you remember the magazine Zembla? That was a literary magazine that came out, and it was only like 10, 12 issues. But I thought what I loved about that is that it had similar ideas within that. You know, sometimes people were asked, there was like interviews with dead people, but there was also articles that were about the idea of write about something that you haven't seen or haven't experienced, but you feel like you have. And it was, you know, that idea of how the imagination works in terms of perception of things, you know, and your reading and your, you know, we've got actually something in the new issue of Beneficial Shock that comes out later in the year, is that someone's done a comic on a film that they remember being a kid about 6 years old, and it's been imprinted on their brain and they have not been able to find it. They're now like 32 years old and they've never been able to find what this film is, but she's got fragments of, and I just said, you know what? That's the thing you should do the comic about. It's just the idea that you've been Googling it, you have these faint ideas, but for her, it's beautifully constructed in the way that it's how memory plays into it, and almost that becomes just as vital to our experience.
Yeah, and almost it's like watching the film now. If you unearthed it, would probably spoil all that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would be how you remember it. It never is.
I know. Well, that's a great note to leave on, Craig. I really, really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad we could make it happen. I know that it was a fucking slog, wasn't it? And I apologize for that.
It was, but I appreciate that you're busy and like times need to sort of connect. I mean, this is going to be a nightmare to transpose, but I'm going to kind of get to the main core stuff because, you know, we've had lots of chats and I think it's brilliant just to kind of see how your mind operates. I can't wait for the new book to come out, whenever that is.
You know.